The winter wind howled through Montana's pine forests as Mark Thompson drove his Ranger truck along the snowy patrol route. 20 years of forest service had taught him to notice even the smallest things out of place, and tonight, something definitely felt wrong. The first sign came as a bright flash in the sky, followed by a sound that didn't belong in these woods, a high-pitched whine that made his teeth ache. Through his windshield, he watched what looked like a falling star, but it moved too slowly and changed direction twice before disappearing behind the mountain ridge. "That's no meteor," he muttered, turning his truck onto the old logging road. Fresh snow crunched under his tires as he followed his instincts toward where the object had vanished. The weather forecast had warned of the worst blizzard in 10 years approaching, giving him maybe 2 hours before it hit. The second sign was the broken treetops, their edges still smoking despite the freezing temperature. Mark grabbed his emergency kit and flashlight, following the trail of destruction. His boots sank deep into the snow with each step, but years of wilderness rescue missions had taught him to push through such difficulties. He found it in a small clearing, a teardrop-shaped pod about the size of his truck, its silver surface scratched and blackened. Steam rose where hot metal met snow, and a faint blue light pulsed from within. Mark approached cautiously, his flashlight beam revealing strange symbols etched into what looked like a door. "Hello," he called out, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Anyone in there? I'm here to help." A soft moan answered him, followed by a sound that needed no translation: pain. The door had a slight gap where it had been damaged in the crash. Mark wedged his fingers into it and pulled, muscles straining until it finally gave way with a hiss of escaping air. What he saw inside made him forget to breathe. A woman lay curled on her side, but she wasn't human. Her skin was a deep blue that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, like the northern lights he sometimes saw during winter patrols. 4 arms, yes 4, wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. Her face was almost human, but with high, swept-back features that reminded him of wind-carved ice, and her hair looked like strands of starlight. She opened her eyes, silver with no pupils, and they locked onto Mark's face. He saw no strangeness in that moment, only raw fear and pain that transcended species. One of her hands reached toward him, trembling. A blast of Arctic wind reminded him of the approaching storm. The alien woman was clearly injured, with silvery blood seeping from several cuts, and very pregnant. She needed help, and his cabin was the only shelter within 20 miles. "I'm going to help you," he said slowly, making his voice gentle as he'd done with countless injured hikers over the years. He pointed to himself. "Mark." Then he pointed to her with a questioning look. She seemed to understand the gesture, touching her chest with one hand while making a sound like wind chimes. "Luna." Mark nodded, then mimed lifting her. Luna's eyes widened, but when another contraction made her gasp, she reached for him with all 4 arms. As carefully as he could, Mark lifted her from the pod. Despite her size, she was nearly as tall as him. She felt surprisingly light, as if her bones were hollow like a bird's. The first snowflakes of the blizzard began to fall as Mark carried Luna to his truck. He got her settled in the passenger seat, cranked up the heater, and draped his spare blanket over her. Through the windshield, he could see the storm clouds rolling in like a dark tide. "Hang in there," he told Luna, putting the truck in gear. "My cabin's not far. We'll figure this out." Luna made a soft humming sound and placed one of her hands over his on the steering wheel. The gesture needed no translation. Trust and gratitude crossed all species barriers. Mark turned the truck toward home, knowing his life had just changed forever, and somehow feeling absolutely certain he was doing the right thing. Mark's cabin emerged from the swirling snow, a solid shape in the growing storm. He had never been so grateful for the sturdy log walls and metal roof he had maintained all these years. Luna's breathing had grown more labored during the drive, and the gentle glow of her skin had dimmed noticeably. "Almost there," he said, parking as close to the front door as possible. The wind howled around them as he carried Luna inside, her forearms clinging to his shoulders. The warmth of his cabin's wood stove welcomed them, and he gently laid her on his couch. Luna's eyes widened as she took in the cabin's interior. The simple wooden furniture, the shelves lined with medical supplies and survival gear, and the radio equipment in the corner all seemed to fascinate her. But another contraction made her curl inward, all four hands pressing against her belly. Mark rushed to gather supplies, clean towels, his first aid kit, and fresh water. His emergency medical training had covered childbirth, but alien childbirth. He wished he had more than basic Ranger medical certification right now. Luna made a series of musical sounds, then pointed at her crashed pod, visible through the window. Mark understood. There must be something important inside it. But the blizzard now raged in full force, the snow so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. "I'll go," he said firmly, putting on his heavy winter gear. "Just hold on." The bitter cold hit him like a wall as he forced his way through the deep snow. The pod's interior was freezing now, but he found what looked like a medical kit with strange symbols matching the ones on Luna's clothing. He also grabbed a glowing crystal that hummed faintly when he touched it. When he returned, Luna's face lit up at the sight of the items. She quickly opened the alien medical kit, revealing instruments that looked both familiar and strange. She tried to show him how to use them, but another contraction doubled her over. The next few hours became a blur of activity. Luna guided him as best she could through gestures and expressions, showing him how to use the crystal to scan her vital signs. Its glow changed from blue to purple when pressed against her skin, which seemed to calm her somewhat. As the night wore on, the storm outside grew fiercer. The radio crackled with emergency warnings about the blizzard, but Mark barely heard them. He was focused entirely on Luna, who grew weaker with each passing hour. The glow of her skin flickered like a fading light bulb. "Stay with me," he urged, holding one of her hands. To his amazement, her skin began to glow brighter where their hands touched. Her silver eyes met his, and she squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Suddenly, Luna sat up straight, her eyes wide. All four of her hands grabbed the couch cushions, and her whole body began to shine with an intense light that filled the cabin. Mark had helped with births before, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The light grew so bright he had to shield his eyes. The air hummed with energy that made his hair stand on end. Then he heard it. Not one cry, but 3 distinct sounds, like tiny wind chimes in different notes. As the light dimmed to a gentle glow, Mark lowered his hand and gasped. Luna lay back exhausted, but somehow looking stronger than before. And there, cradled in her 4 arms, were 3 tiny beings. Each baby was smaller than a human newborn, their skin shimmering with subtle patterns of light that danced and changed like the northern lights. 3 pairs of silver eyes blinked up at him, and 3 tiny mouths made soft cooing sounds that reminded him of morning birdsong. Luna smiled weakly and held them out toward Mark, clearly wanting him to hold them. With trembling hands, Mark gently took the triplets. They felt warm and light in his arms, like holding 3 small stars. As he cradled them, their skin began to pulse with a soft, peaceful light that matched their mother's. Outside, the blizzard still raged, but inside the cabin, Mark knew he had just become part of something miraculous. These 4 beings from beyond the stars were now his responsibility, and somehow that felt exactly right. The first morning after the birth brought a peaceful silence as the blizzard finally ended. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, making the triplets' skin sparkle like morning dew. Mark sat in his old rocking chair, watching in wonder as Luna showed him how to feed the babies with glowing drops of light from her fingertips. "They're beautiful," he said softly, even though he knew Luna couldn't understand his words. But she smiled, seeming to grasp his meaning. Each baby had its own unique pattern of lights under their skin. One swirled like galaxies, another rippled like waves, and the third pulsed like a gentle heartbeat. Luna pointed to each baby in turn, making 3 distinct musical sounds. Mark tried to copy the sounds but failed completely, making Luna laugh for the first time. A sound like silver bells in spring. She then pointed to the sunrise visible through the window, then to the first baby. Dawn, Mark suggested, pointing to the baby whose skin swirled with spiral patterns. Luna nodded eagerly, clearly pleased with the translation. For the second child, whose lights rippled like evening colors, she pointed to the setting sun in a picture on Mark's wall. Dusk, Mark said, and Luna hummed in agreement. For the third, whose lights danced like the northern lights, Luna pointed upward and made sweeping gestures with her hands. Aurora, Mark finished, and all three babies cooed at once, their lights brightening in response to the names. Over the next few days, Mark learned that caring for alien babies wasn't so different from human ones. They needed warmth, comfort, and love. But they had their unique traits too. When they cried, their lights dimmed almost to darkness, and the only way to soothe them was to hold them close until their glow returned. Luna grew stronger each day, but she never took her eyes off Mark when he handled the triplets. He could tell she was surprised by how gentle his large, rough hands could be as he cradled her children. One evening, as he walked Aurora around the cabin to settle her for sleep, he caught Luna wiping away tears that shimmered like liquid starlight. The babies had another special trait. They glowed brightest when they were happy. Mark discovered this when he started singing old lullabies to them. Though his voice was far from perfect, the triplets would light up the whole room, their patterns swaying in time with his songs. Row, row, row your boat, he sang softly one night, and three pairs of silver eyes watched him with absolute trust. Luna sat nearby, her own light pulsing gently as she learned the simple melody. Then came the moment that changed everything. Mark was feeding Dawn, cradling her close as she drank the light drops Luna had prepared, when she reached up with her tiny hand and touched his cheek. Her first word wasn't a musical sound like her mother's language. Instead, she clearly said, "Dada." Mark froze, looking at Luna with concern. How would she feel about her child calling him that? But Luna was smiling, her eyes bright with tears. Then Dusk and Aurora joined in, their voices chiming Dada in harmony, their lights blazing with joy. Luna stood and walked over to Mark, placing one hand on his shoulder while cradling Dawn with her other arms. She pointed to herself and made her musical name sound, then pointed to Mark and said, in careful imitation of her children, "Dada." Mark felt tears in his own eyes as he understood. Luna was accepting him as part of their family. The triplets had bridged the gap between their species with one simple word, turning his lonely cabin into a real home. That night, as the babies slept in the makeshift crib he'd built, their lights pulsing softly in their dreams, Mark watched Luna arrange glowing crystals from her medical kit in a protective circle around them. He realized that somehow, in saving them, he had saved himself from a lifetime of solitude. Sometimes, the greatest gifts came from the stars themselves. 2 weeks after the triplets' birth, Mark sat at his kitchen table with Luna, surrounded by simple drawings they'd made to communicate. The babies slept nearby in their crib, their gentle glow creating dancing shadows on the cabin walls. "So your people are called." Mark pointed to a drawing Luna had made of beings similar to herself, all glowing with different patterns of light. Luna touched the paper and made a melodic sound that reminded Mark of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Luminary." She then helped Mark say it correctly, laughing softly when he almost got it right. Through their drawings, a story began to emerge. Luna drew ships, not like her small escape pod, but massive vessels with sharp angles. Her hand trembled as she drew them, and her skin's glow dimmed with fear. She pointed to herself, then the triplets, and made a motion like someone running away. "You were escaping," Mark said quietly, understanding now. "Someone was chasing you." Luna nodded, then drew more pictures showing people in dark suits taking other luminary away in cages. She pointed to her own skin, then made a gesture like healing a wound. Mark watched in amazement as she demonstrated, healing a small cut on his hand with just a touch of her glowing fingers. "Your people can heal," he said in wonder, watching the cut vanish completely. "That's why they're hunting you." Dawn woke up then, her tiny voice calling Dada. Her swirling light patterns brightened as Mark picked her up. Soon, Dusk and Aurora awakened too, not wanting to miss any attention. Luna watched with a mixture of joy and sadness as the babies reached for Mark with complete trust. That evening, as Mark prepared dinner, he discovered the luminary could eat most human foods. Luna tried to teach him more about her language. She pointed to the flames in the fireplace and made a series of musical notes. Mark tried to copy the sound, making the triplets giggle when he failed completely. "Well, at least someone finds my accent funny," he chuckled, tickling Aurora's belly. Her lights danced with happiness, creating tiny auroras that floated around her like miniature northern lights. Luna suddenly became serious, drawing Mark's attention to a new picture she'd made. It showed the night sky with unfamiliar constellations. She pointed up, then to herself and the babies, then made a questioning gesture. Mark understood. She was asking if he expected them to leave, to go back to their own world. The thought made his heart heavy. He'd grown to love the triplets as his own, and Luna had become, what? A friend, family, something he couldn't quite name. Before he could respond, all three babies created a spectacular light show, their patterns synchronizing into a beautiful dance of colors. "Dada stay." They chimed together, having picked up more English words each day. "Mama stay." Luna's eyes filled with starlit tears as she watched her children. She picked up another paper and drew the cabin, adding 5 glowing figures inside. Herself, the triplets, and Mark. She pointed to the drawing and nodded firmly. "Home?" Mark asked, hoping he understood. "Home," Luna repeated carefully in English, the words sounding like music in her voice. She took Mark's hand, her touch sending warm light spreading up his arm. The triplets crawled over to join them, each adding their small hands to the pile, their combined glow filling the cabin with colors Mark had never seen before. In that moment, Mark realized that family didn't need words or even the same number of arms to be real. Sometimes it just needed hearts that glowed with the same love, whether those hearts beat under human skin or shimmered with starlight. As they sat together in their glowing circle, Mark knew he would protect them with everything he had. But a small worry nagged at the back of his mind. What if the people hunting Luna found them? He looked at his newfound family and silently promised that no one would ever put them in cages, not while he lived. The first warning came on a quiet spring morning. Mark was teaching the triplets their daily English lesson, while Luna tended to her small garden of glowing plants outside the cabin. Dawn, Dusk, and Aurora sat on the floor, their lights pulsing with excitement as they learned new words. "Tree," Mark said, pointing to a picture. "Tree." The triplets chimed in harmony, making the words sound like music. Suddenly, Luna burst through the door, her skin barely glowing, a sign of extreme fear that Mark had learned to recognize. She quickly drew the curtains and gathered the babies in her 4 arms. "What's wrong?" Mark asked, but Luna was already drawing in the air with light from her finger. The image showed a ship, similar to the ones from her earlier drawings, approaching Earth. The triplets sensed their mother's fear and began to dim their lights, a habit Mark knew meant they were scared. He picked up Aurora, who was starting to cry, her usual dancing lights now barely visible. "Hunters," Luna said in English, one of the few words she'd learned that wasn't happy or family-related. She pointed up, then held the babies closer. "Find light. Find us." Mark understood. The collectors could track the luminary's natural glow. He quickly moved to the window and saw something that made his heart stop. A dark shape moving behind the clouds, too geometric to be natural. Luna placed her hand on Mark's chest and closed her eyes in concentration. Suddenly, a warm light spread through his body, and he gasped as he felt energy flowing into him. When he looked at his hands, they had a faint blue glow. "Protect," Luna explained weakly, obviously drained by whatever she had done. Hide light. Hide family. The triplets watched with wide silver eyes as their mother gave Mark part of her power. Dawn reached out and touched his glowing hand, saying, "Data shine." But Mark could see how much the power transfer had weakened Luna. She swayed on her feet, and her usual brilliant glow was now barely brighter than moonlight. He caught her before she could fall. A deep humming sound filled the air, making the cabin windows vibrate. The triplets huddled together, their combined glow dimming to almost nothing. Mark peered through a gap in the curtains and saw it, a black ship, sleek and predatory, hovering over the forest where Luna's pod had crashed months ago. "The caves," Mark whispered, remembering the complex cave system he mapped during his years as a ranger. "We can hide there." Luna nodded weakly but pointed to herself and shook her head. She was too weak to move quickly. She then pointed to Mark and the triplets, making a pushing motion toward the back door. "No," Mark said firmly. "All of us. Family stays together." The humming grew louder. Through the window, Mark saw dark figures descending from the ship on beams of red light. They wore black armor that seemed to absorb the sunlight around them. Mark quickly grabbed his emergency pack, always ready by the door, and helped Luna to her feet. He had spent 20 years learning every trail, every hidden path in these mountains. Now those skills would save his family. The triplets, understanding the need for quiet, held onto Luna's lower arms while Mark supported her with his shoulder. They slipped out the back door just as a scanning beam of red light swept over the cabin's front. "Data brave," Dusk whispered as they crept through the underbrush. Her siblings nodded, their dim lights pulsing in unison. Mark led them toward the hidden cave entrance, carefully choosing paths that wouldn't leave tracks. The piece of Luna's power inside him seemed to pulse in time with their movement, as if helping to shield them. As they vanished into the forest's shadows, Mark heard the sound of the cabin door being broken down. But he smiled grimly. The hunters didn't know these mountains. They didn't know about the caves, the hidden valleys, or the old mine shafts that honeycombed these peaks. Most importantly, they didn't know what a human father would do to protect his family, even if that family came from the stars. Deep in the mountain caves, Mark pressed his hand against the rough wall, his newfound glow lighting the way for his family. Luna sat in a hidden alcove with the triplets, all four of them dimming their lights to avoid detection. Outside, they could hear the hunters' search vehicles humming through the night sky. "Stay here," Mark whispered, checking his radio and flashlight. "I'll lead them away." "Dada no," Dawn pleaded, her spiral light patterns flickering with fear. Her siblings joined in, their tiny hands reaching for him. Luna touched Mark's glowing hand with all four of hers, transferring a final burst of energy into him. "Protect," she said weakly. "Return." Mark nodded, his heart heavy as he looked at his strange but precious family. The hunters had already destroyed his cabin, and now they were systematically scanning the forest. It was time to show them why you don't threaten a forest ranger's family on his own mountain. He moved through the caves like a ghost, using his decades of experience. The power Luna had given him seemed to pulse stronger as he emerged from a different cave entrance, far from his hidden family. In the darkness, his faint blue glow would look just like a luminary trying to hide. The trick worked instantly. A red scanning beam swept over him, and he heard sharp commands in an alien language. Mark smiled and began to run, making sure to leave obvious tracks in the spring mud. Behind him, 3 hunters in black armor crashed through the underbrush. Their heavy boots were useless on the tricky mountain trails, and their fancy weapons couldn't help them navigate the treacherous ground. Mark led them higher up the mountain, toward the old mining areas. He keyed his radio, letting out a burst of static that echoed from several hidden speakers he'd set up over the years for guiding lost hikers. The sound bounced off the cliffs, confusing the hunters' tracking devices. A large shape loomed in the darkness. Old Bill, the grizzly bear Mark had known for years. The bear rose on his hind legs, drawn by the strange lights and sounds. The hunters fired red energy beams, missing completely as Old Bill charged forward, more angry than hurt. The distraction let Mark slip away, circling back through a narrow canyon he knew well. The hunter's ship tried to follow, its sleek form ill-suited for the tight space. Sharp rocks scraped against its hull with a horrible screech. More of the forest's residents joined the chaos. A wolf pack, disturbed by the noise, began howling from different directions. Owls swooped through the hunter's scanning beams, creating false readings. Even the mountain lions emerged, their screams echoing off the cliffs. Mark reached the high ridge where he'd hidden emergency supplies years ago. Below, he could see the hunters' confusion as nature itself seemed to turn against them. Their sensors were useless, overwhelmed by the mountain's magnetic rocks and the chaos of wildlife. He struck a flare, its bright red light reflecting off the clouds. The hunters turned toward it, but Mark was already gone, sliding down a scree slope they'd never dare to follow. Their ship tried to keep up but slammed into an outcropping, sending sparks flying. Dawn broke over the mountain as Mark set off his final surprise. Emergency sirens from all the ranger stations in the area, their wails mixing with the wolves' howls. The hunters' communications filled with static and confusion. Finally, Mark heard what he'd been waiting for. The sound of their ship's engines changing tone. The hunters were retreating, their sensors scrambled, their ship damaged, and their quarry seemingly protected by the mountain itself. He waited until the ship vanished into the clouds before making his way back to the cave. As he approached the hidden alcove, 3 small voices called out in happiness. "Data vac. Data safe." The triplets flew into his arms, their lights blazing with joy. Luna pulled all of them into a 4-armed embrace, her glow strengthening with relief. "Home?" Aurora asked hopefully. Mark looked at his glowing hand, then at his family, and smiled. Not the cabin anymore, but yes, home. Together. Because home wasn't the burnt cabin or even the mountain itself. Home was wherever this remarkable family of his remained together, their lights shining as one against the darkness. 1 month after the hunters' retreat, Mark stood outside their new home. A cozy ranger station deep in the mountains that the Forest Service had forgotten years ago. The triplets played in the evening air, their lights creating beautiful patterns against the darkening sky. Dawn floated a small ball of light between her hands, a new trick she'd learned last week. "Looked, Dada," she called proudly as the light changed colors from blue to purple. Dusk and Aurora weren't far behind, their own lights forming shapes like butterflies and stars that danced around them. At 6 months old, they looked like human 2-year-olds, their growth accelerated by their luminary nature. Luna sat on the porch, her glow fully restored, working on her small garden of glowing plants. She looked up suddenly, her silver eyes wide. Mark had learned to trust her instincts, but this time she was smiling. "Family comes," she said in her now better English. A soft humming filled the air, different from the harsh sound of the hunter's ship. Lights appeared in the sky, but these were gentle blues and silvers that reminded Mark of his children's glow. The triplets jumped up and down excitedly. "Pretty lights, Dada. Like Mama." A ship descended, its surface shimmering like moonlight on water. It was organic in shape, nothing like the angular hunter vessel. When it landed in the clearing, the door opened with a musical chime. 3 luminary emerged, their lights pulsing with joy at the sight of Luna. They rushed forward, embracing her with multiple arms, their voices creating a symphony of chime-like sounds. Mark watched nervously, wondering if this meant goodbye. But Luna reached out and took his hand, pulling him forward to meet what he now realized was her family. "Brother," she said, pointing to the tallest luminary. "Sisters," she added, indicating the other 2. Then, proudly, "My Mark. My Earth Heart." The triplets ran forward, speaking excitedly in a mix of English and luminary sounds. "This Dada. He save us. He make hunters go away. He teach us Earth songs." Luna's brother stepped forward, his light dimming to a gentle glow. In careful English, he said, "Thank you for saving my sister, for loving her children." The sisters added something in their musical language, which Luna translated. They say Earth now protected. Hunters mark this planet as forbidden. Too dangerous, she laughed. They tell stories about the mountain that fights back and the glowing human who commands the forest animals. Mark rubbed his neck modestly. Just a forest ranger doing his job. Luna's family spent hours with them, sharing news and meeting the triplets properly. They explained that after detecting the battle with the hunters, they had traced Luna's pod's flight path. It had taken months to reach Earth safely, avoiding hunter patrols. Finally, Luna's brother asked the question Mark had been dreading. Will you return home with us? Before Luna could answer, the triplets created a spectacular light show, their powers combining to form an image of their little ranger station, the mountains, and Mark. We are home. They chimed together. Earth home. With Dada. Luna smiled at her family. My children speak truth. Heart home is here now. She took Mark's hand again. If Earth accepts us. Mark's reply was interrupted by a crackle from his radio. Ranger Thompson. You there, Mark? Got reports of strange lights up your way. Mark grinned and keyed the radio. Just the northern lights, base. And, my family's visiting. Family. Didn't know you had family, Mark. I do now, he said, watching the triplets teach their new aunts and uncle how to make shadow puppets with light. Best family a man could ask for. Luna's family decided to stay on Earth for a while, helping them establish what would become the first secret Earth luminary settlement. The ranger station grew into a hidden sanctuary for their people, protected by the mountains, and watched over by a human ranger who glowed faintly blue on moonlit nights. Years later, visitors to the national park would sometimes report seeing strange, beautiful lights dancing in the mountains. The rangers would just smile and say it was the northern lights. But Mark knew it was just his children playing under the stars, their lights shining like beacons of hope for both their peoples. And every night, Mark would look at his impossible, wonderful family and thank whatever twist of fate had brought that damaged pod to his mountain on that snowy night, bringing light and love to his solitary life.